Welcome back to this next video in the series of lectures on the Mendel laws. In the last two videos, I've told you about the law of segregation, the law of dominance, and the law of independent assortment. And in this video, I want to focus on how to solve the problems of Mendel law of segregation if they appear in your exam. Now, if you have given a problem, like if a problem is given to you in the paper, that problem is usually preceded by a note, and the note is going to give you the conditions that you have to apply to solve the problem. So if you look at this problem, for this problem, the note given says that in pea plants, the tall parent habit that is dominant over the dwarf one. Now, this particular note, it is telling you that the tall habit that will be dominant over the dwarf habit. So this is one kind of the information that you are going to get from this particular note. Another important thing is that the allele for the tall habit that will be represented by the capital T, and the allele for the dwarf habit that will be represented by the small t. And another important thing is that if you look at this note, it is only focusing on a single trait. That is, it is only focusing on the height of the plant. So you are actually talking about the monohybrid crosses. So you have to read the note very carefully in order to solve the problem. Now, this problem states that if a plant homozygous for tall is crossed with one homozygous for dwarf. Now, this particular statement is actually giving you the genotype of the parents that you are going to cross with one another. So it is talking about a plant which is homozygous for tall. What this means is that the genotype of this particular plant, if it is homozygous tall, this means that the genotype will be capital T and capital T. Because it is homozygous and it is tall, that means that both of the alleles that will be for the tall habit. And you are actually crossing this with another parent which is homozygous for dwarf. Again, the other parent that is homozygous, but that is homozygous for dwarf, that means that both of the alleles that will be small t and the small t. This means that you have to cross these two parents. So this is important to understand. If you are given the heterozygous tall, of course the genotype that will be then the capital T and the small t. But as the problem says that it is homozygous tall, that means that both of the alleles that will be capital T and capital T. And the homozygous dwarf means that both of the alleles that will be small t and the small t. So you have to cross these two parents. Now, if you are going to cross these two parents, what will be the appearance of the F1? Then the first part of the problem says that if you cross these two parents, what will be the appearance of the offspring in the F1? Now, the first thing you have to do is that you have to make the gametes for this parent, and you have to make the gametes for this parent. So if you talk about the gametes, so you will say the gametes for parent number 1. So if the parent number 1 is capital T and capital T, as you can see that both of the alleles, they are identical to each other. So what you can expect is that this particular parent is going to produce only a single kind of the gamete that will be represented by the capital T, because the law of segregation says that during the gamete formation, the members of a gene pair, they get separated from each other. So if you separate them from each other, one capital T is going to come in one gamete, the other capital T is going to get into the other gamete. So as the gametes, they are identical to each other, that means that this particular parent with the genotype capital T and capital T will be producing a single kind of the gamete that will be represented by the capital T. If you talk about the gametes of the parent number 2, the gametes for the parent number 2 is the genotype is the small t and the small t. Just like the above parent, this particular parent can produce only a single kind of the gamete, and that will be represented by the small t. So you have got the gametes for both of the parents. Now what you have to do is that if you cross them, you are going to get the F1 generation. So if you look at this one, this is the Punnett square, and the left side of the Punnett square, that is going to show you the gametes of one parent. For example, we are taking this parent on the left side, it is producing a single kind of the gamete that is represented by the capital T, and another gamete by the capital T. The top side of the Punnett square, that show you the gametes of the other parents, and if you talk about the other parent, that is only producing a single kind of the gamete, that will be the small t. Now if you cross this gamete of this parent, this gamete of this parent, if you cross them, what you are going to get is capital T combined with a small t. Now if you look at this one, if you cross them, if you cross this gamete with this particular gamete, you are going to get the capital T and the small t. If you cross this gamete with this one, you are going to get the capital T and the small t. If you cross this with this one, actually you are going to get the capital T and the small t. So this is the F1 generation. Now if you look at the F1 generation, the genotype of all of the offspring, talk about the genotype of these offspring, that will be the capital T and the small t. If you talk about their phenotype, so their phenotype, that will be tall in nature, because as they have given you in the note that the tall habit that is dominant over the dwarf one, this means that the capital T is going to represent itself in the homozygous as well as in the heterozygous condition. So if you look at these offspring, all of these offsprings, they are actually having a tall phenotype, but their genotype, that will be heterozygous, that will not be homozygous just like their parent. So this is what you are going to get in the F1 generation, that all of the offsprings, they will be tall with the heterozygous genotype. Now the second part of the question says what will be the appearance of the F2. Now let us come to the F2. As you all know that to get the F2, what Mendel did, that he went for the self-fertilization of the F1. So you are actually crossing the F1 to the F1, and we have already got the F1. What will be the what offspring they are producing in the F1. So if you are getting the F2 generation, what you are actually crossing is that you are actually crossing a heterozygous stall plant to a heterozygous stall plant, because this is what we got in the F1 generation. And if you are self-crossing them, you are actually crossing the heterozygous stall plant to another heterozygous stall plant. Just like the F1, the first thing you have to do is that you have to go for the formation of the gametes. So what kind of gametes you can expect from these parents? Let us talk about the gametes of the parent number 1. The gametes of parent number 1. What is the parent number 1? The capital T and the small t. Now if you look at over here, you can actually expect two kind of the gametes from here. One gamete will be having a capital T allele, and the other gamete that will be having the small t allele, because during the gamete formation, the members of this pair, they are going to get separate from each other, and when they separate from each other, that means that one of the gamete will be having the capital T allele, the other gamete will be having the small t allele. As the second parent, the parent number 2, that is identical to parent number 1. If you talk about the gametes of the parent number 2, same genotype, that means you will be getting the same gametes from this parent as well. Now if you cross them, if you are going to cross them, you have to make a Punnett square over here. And if you make a Punnett square, this side of the Punnett square is showing you the gametes of one parent, the capital T and the small t. The top side of the Punnett square is showing you the gametes of the other parent, again the capital T and the small t. Now if you cross them, this capital T can combine with this capital T. This capital T can combine with the small t. This capital T can combine with this small t. And this small t, it can combine with this small t. Now, if you look at this one, what you are going to get is, if you talk about the genotypes of the offsprings, you are actually having three kind of the genotypes over here. One genotype is the capital T and the capital T, and its phenotype, that will be tall, because the capital T and capital T, that is going to represent a tall phenotype. The other kind of the genotype you are getting is the capital T and the small t. So another kind of the genotype you are getting is the capital T and a small t. This will be the genotype. And if you talk about the phenotype of this particular genotype, again, this will be tall because the capital T that is dominant over the small t. Another kind of the genotype that you are getting, that is the small t and the small t, and the phenotype of this particular genotype, that will be dwarf, because both of the alleles, they are recessive in nature. If you look at the number of these tall plant, it is only one having a genotype of the capital T and the capital T. This capital T and the small t, their number, that is 2, and the dwarf, again, that is 1. So what you are getting actually is that you are getting 3 tall plants, because this is 1 tall, this is 2 tall, so you are actually getting a total of 3 tall plants, and you are actually getting 1 dwarf plant. So phenotypically, you will be actually having 3 tall plants phenotypically, and you will be having 1 dwarf plant. But if you talk about their genotypes, this tall, which is having actually 3 in number, they will be divided into 2 types of the genotype. One genotype will be homozygous, the other genotype that will be heterozygous. But as the tall can express itself in the homozygous as well as in the heterozygous form, therefore the number of the phenotypes for tall, that will be 3, but the genotype for homozygous tall, that will be 1. The genotypes of the heterozygous tall, that will be 2, and there will be 1 dwarf plant. So this is the F2 generation. Now the third part of this question says that what will be the appearance of the offspring of a cross of the F1 with its tall parent. What this means is that now you have to cross the F1 generation with its tall parent. Now what is the F1 generation? In the F1 is actually the capital T and the small t, heterozygous tall. And the tall parent given to us in the first place, the tall parent, that was homozygous tall. Now what this means is that you have to cross the heterozygous tall to homozygous tall. This is what you are going to get now. Now if you talk about the gametes of the parent number 1, again, the first thing you have to do is you have to make the gametes of the parent number 1. Let us take this one as the parent number 1. So as we have discussed earlier, this is going to produce 2 kind of the gametes, one having the capital T allele, the other having the small t allele. If you talk about the gametes of the second parent, which is homozygous tall, we have already seen this, that a homozygous tall plant produce only a single kind of the gamete, that will be the capital T. Now if you make a Punnett square for this, if you are going to make a Punnett square like this, now this side of the Punnett square, that is showing you the gametes of the parent number 1, for example. So this will be capital T and the small t. The top side of the Punnett square is showing you the gametes of the other parent, that will be the capital T and the capital T. So if you cross them, this gamete can combine with this gamete, giving you a capital T and a capital T. This can combine with this one, giving you a capital T and a capital T. This can combine with this one, the capital T and the small t. This can combine with this one, giving you a capital T and a small t. So if you look at this one, all of the offsprings, that will be having a tall phenotype. All of them, their phenotype, that will be a tall phenotype. But if you look at the genotypes, there will be 2 kind of the genotypes. One, the capital T and the capital T. This genotype, this will be homozygous tall. The genotype will be capital T and capital T. So you are actually talking about a homozygous tall, and of course the phenotype, that will be tall. If you talk about these 2, the capital T and the small t, the genotype, again, this is the genotype, but this is heterozygous. And again, the phenotype, that will be tall, because the capital T, that is dominant over the small t. This is what you are going to get in the cross, when you cross the F1 plant with its tall parent. The last part of the question says that what will be the appearance of the offspring if you are going to cross the F1 plant with its dwarf parent. So now you have to do is that you have to cross the F1 plant. The F1 of course is the capital T and the small t, and you have to cross this with its dwarf parent, and the dwarf parent in the first place, that was the small t and the small t. So what you are actually going to get is capital T and small t, and you have to cross that with the small t and the small t. Now what you have to do is you have to make the gametes of the parent number 1. Parent number 1 is capital T and small t. You already know that it is going to produce two kind of the gametes, having a capital T and the other gamete having the small t. If you talk about the gametes of the parent number 2, what you are going to get is that the genotype is the small t and the small t, and it is going to produce only a single kind of the gamete, that will be the small t. If you cross them, like if you make a Punnett square for this side is going to show you this the gametes of this parent with capital T and the small t, and the top side of the Punnett square, that is going to show you the gametes of the other parent, and that will be of course only the small t and the small t. So if you cross them, what you are going to get is the capital T and the small t. You combine this with this one, the capital T and the small t, this small t and this small t, and this small t and with this small t. Now in this particular cross, what you are going to get is that this particular genotype, the capital T and the small t, this is the genotype, and the phenotype for this particular genotype, that will be tall, because the capital T that is dominant over the small t. And if you talk about this genotype, the small t and the small t, this genotype, the phenotype for this particular genotype will be dwarf, because both of the alleles, they are recessive in nature. If you talk about their number, 50% of the offspring, that will be heterozygous tall, and 50% of the offsprings, that will be homozygous dwarf, or you can simply say a dwarf, because it is understandable that the dwarf can only be there if the homozygous condition that is there. So this is how you can actually solve the problems of the Mendel law of segregation. Now let us talk about another problem. Now in this particular problem, the note that is going to remain the same, that the tall habit that is dominant over the dwarf habit. Now in this particular question, you are asked that what will be the gametes produced by the following parents. You have been given the parents, and what you have to do is that you have to identify that what will be the gametes produced by these particular parents, and what will be the height of the offspring, whether they are tall or they are dwarf, for each of the following crosses. Now let us first talk about the first problem. The first thing we have to do is that we have to make the gametes that these parents can produce. So if you talk about the gametes of the parent number 1, gametes of parent number 1, the parent number 1 gamete, the capital T and the capital T, this is the genotype of the parent number 1. And as I have told you that the homozygous tall, it can only produce a single kind of the gamete, which will be having the capital T allele. If you talk about the parent number 2, the gametes of the parent number 2, as the genotype that is heterozygous, and we have already seen that the heterozygous tall produce two kind of the gametes, a capital T and the small t. The other thing you have to find out is the height of the offsprings. Now they are asking you about two things, that what will be the gametes produced by the parents, we have made the gametes, and what will be the height of the offspring, we are going to determine that now, that what will be the height of the offspring if you are going to cross these two parents. This side of the Punnett square is showing you the gametes of the parent number 1, so that will be capital T and capital T. If you talk about this side, this is going to show you the gametes of the second parent, which will be the capital T and the small t. Now if you cross them, this gamete can combine with this gamete, giving you a capital T and capital T. This gamete can combine with this one, giving you the capital T and the small t. This capital T can combine with this one, giving you the capital T and the capital T. This can combine with this one, giving you the capital T and the small t. Now, if you talk about the phenotype of these things, so first we have to write out the genotypes of the offspring. So one kind of the genotype you are getting from these crosses is the capital T, this one, this capital T and capital T over here and over here. And the phenotype of these offsprings, that will be tall, because the both of the alleles, they are actually for the tall phenotype. If you talk about the second one, the capital T and the small t, two of them, they are the capital T and the small t. And of course the phenotype, again, that will be tall, because the capital T that is dominant over the small t. So the capital T is going to represent itself in the heterozygous condition as well. The only difference between these two tall will that the genotype of these tall plant, that will be homozygous, and the genotype of these tall plants, that will be heterozygous. Now the second part of the question says that what will be the gametes produced by these offsprings, by these parents, and what will be the height of the offsprings. Now let us focus on this one. So the first thing you have to do is that you have to make the gametes. So the gametes of the parent number 1, the parent number 1 given to us is the capital T and the small t. This is the genotype, and you have already seen this, that the heterozygous star plant, it produces two kind of the gametes, one with a capital T and the other one with a small t. And the other one is the gametes of the parent number 2, that is a dwarf one, and this particular genotype can produce only a single kind of the gamete, that will be having a small t. Now, if you are going to look at the offsprings, what kind of the offspring can you expect from these parent? This particular side is going to show you the gametes of the parent number 1, that will be the capital T and the small t. And the top is going to show you the gametes of the other parent, which will be the small t and the small t. Now, if you cross them, this capital T can combine with this small t. This capital T can combine with this small t. This small t can combine with this small t. And this small t, it can combine with this small t. Now here, if you look at the offsprings, you are actually getting two kind of the offsprings. The first one is that if you look at the genotypes of the offspring, the capital T and the small t, these are one of the offspring that you are getting. So the genotype is heterozygous, and their phenotype, that will be tall, because the capital T, that is dominant over the small t. If you talk about these two, the capital small t and the small t, and the small t and the small t, so the genotype is small t and the small t, and the phenotype, that is going to be a dwarf in nature. So actually you are getting 50% tall from these parents, you are actually getting 50% dwarf from these parents. Now let us talk about the last one, where you are actually crossing the two heterozygous tall plant to each other. So what will be the gametes produced by these parents then? So let us talk about the gametes produced. The gametes of the parent number 1, the genotype is heterozygous tall, and you all know that the heterozygous tall plant can produce two kind of the gametes with the capital T and the small t. The gametes of the parent number 2, again, that is heterozygous tall, so it can actually produce two kind of the gametes, the capital T and the small t. So these are the gametes that you can actually produce from these parents. If you talk about the offspring of these parents, this side is going to show you the gametes of one parent, the capital T and the small t. This is showing you the gametes of the other parent, the capital T and the small t. So if you cross them, this capital T is going to combine with this capital T. This capital T is going to combine with this small t. This capital T can combine with this small t, and this small t can actually combine with this small t. So you are actually getting, if you talk about the offsprings, this is one of the genotype with the capital T and the small t. Again, the genotype of the first kind of the offspring you are getting is the capital T, and of course the phenotype, that is going to be tall. If you talk about these two, the capital T and the small t, this genotype, again the phenotype that is going to be taught because the capital T that is dominant over the small t. If you talk about the last one, this particular genotype, the small t and the small t, of course the phenotype that is going to be dwarf in nature. So what you are actually getting is, you are getting this is tall, this is tall, this is tall. So you are actually getting 3 tall and you are actually getting 1 dwarf. Although these 3 talls, if you look at the genotypes, their genotypic ratio will be 2 to 1, because this 2, that will be this particular one, the capital T and the small t, and if you talk about this one, this capital T and capital T, it is making this one. So if you talk about the phenotypes of these offsprings, you will be getting 3 tall, you will be getting 1 dwarf plant. So this is how you are actually going to solve the problems on the Mendel Law of Segregation. We'll continue this in the next video.